Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the smell of rich stew simmering on a stove. The warmth of a kitchen filled with love. The sound of a wooden spoon stirring, slowly, deliberately, with the kind of care that only devotion can inspire. Now imagine that same kitchen holding a secret so dark, so unthinkable, that when the truth finally surfaced, an entire community stood frozen in disbelief. She was a wife, a beloved neighbor, a woman whose smile could light up the hardest days. But what she did for love, what she believed would save the man she cherished, would tear apart everything everyone thought they knew about her. This is not just a story. This is a warning. A question. A mirror held up to the very nature of love itself. If you stand for justice, for truth, for understanding the depth of the human heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about devotion. Her name doesn't matter. In this story, she could be anyone. Your neighbor. Your sister. The woman at the market who always greets you with warmth. She lived in a small community where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where doors stayed unlocked, where children played freely in the streets, where trust was the currency that kept life moving. And she was beloved. Every morning, she would wake before dawn. You could see the light from her kitchen window glowing softly in the darkness, a beacon of warmth before the sun even thought to rise. By the time her husband stirred, breakfast would be waiting. Not just any breakfast. The kind that made him close his eyes with the first bite, that made him reach across the table to squeeze her hand and whisper, "How did I get so lucky?" The neighbors would say she had magic in her hands. Everything she touched turned to gold. Her garden bloomed fuller than anyone else's. Her home smelled of cinnamon and hope. Children would gather at her door, knowing she always had something sweet to offer, always had a story to tell. Her husband. He adored her. 10 years of marriage, and he still looked at her the way poets describe in their verses. He would brag to his friends at the village square, chest puffed with pride, "My wife is a treasure. She takes care of me like no one else could." But love, true love, sometimes whispers in languages we don't understand. Sometimes it speaks in shadows we're too afraid to examine. Because late at night, when the village slept, she would slip from their bed. Quiet as a prayer. And in that kitchen, under the glow of candlelight, she would begin her real work. If you've ever known someone who seemed too perfect, too devoted, too intense in their love, comment "true" below. Because perfection, my friends, always has a price. It started small. Like all descents into darkness do. Her husband began feeling tired. Just a little at first. He'd blame it on work, on stress, on getting older. "I'm fine," he'd say, waving away her concern. But she would look at him with those eyes, those deep, worried eyes, and insist he eat more. "You need your strength," she'd whisper, ladling another serving into his bowl. And he would eat. Because it tasted so good. Because she made it with love. But there were signs. Signs that only became clear later, when everything unraveled like thread pulled from fabric. The neighbors noticed she'd started going to strange places. Early mornings, she'd be seen at the edge of the village, near the old burial grounds. Places people avoided. Places where the air felt heavy with memory and loss. "Where are you going so early?" a friend asked once. She smiled that warm smile. "Just gathering herbs. You know me. Always trying new recipes." And it was true. She was always trying new recipes. But the ingredients were not what anyone imagined. In her kitchen, hidden in the back of her cupboard behind jars of spices and dried leaves, were other containers. Small glass bottles with dark liquid inside. Cloth pouches that held powders no one could name. And a leather-bound book, passed down from her grandmother, filled with symbols and words in a language that predated the village itself. She believed. Oh, how she believed. Her grandmother had taught her young. There are forces in this world, child. Forces that want to take what we love. Illness. Misfortune. Death itself. But there are ways, old ways, to fight back. And when her husband started getting sick, when that cough began rattling in his chest, when his energy started draining like water from a cracked pot, she knew. She knew something was coming for him. "I won't lose you," she whispered to him one night as he slept, her hand pressed against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. "I won't let the darkness take you." So she opened that old book. She read the rituals her grandmother had marked in faded ink. Rituals of protection. Rituals of binding life to life. Rituals that required sacrifice. The first time she added it to his food, her hands shook. Blood. Human blood. Just a few drops mixed into the stew, ancient words whispered over the pot. Protection from the inside out. Life force shared. A shield against whatever curse she believed was haunting him. She told herself it was love. She told herself it was salvation. She told herself that the old ways knew truths the modern world had forgotten. Her husband ate. He smiled. He said it was the best meal she'd ever made. And for a while, for a brief, terrible while, he did seem better. If you think love can make someone do the unthinkable, hit that like button. But don't judge yet. Don't decide yet. Because you haven't heard why she truly did it. 3 months. That's how long it went on. 3 months of secret rituals. 3 months of her sleeping out before dawn to gather what she needed. 3 months of meals prepared with ingredients that existed in the space between devotion and madness. But darkness always finds the light. Truth always claws its way to the surface. Her husband's condition worsened. The brief improvement faded like morning mist, and something new took its place. Weakness. Confusion. A strange fever that wouldn't break. "We need to see a doctor," his brother insisted, finding him collapsed in their courtyard one afternoon. "This isn't normal," she protested. "He just needs rest. He needs my care." But the brother wouldn't hear it. He practically carried his sibling to the clinic in the next town, to a doctor with modern equipment, with blood tests and scanners and questions that made her stomach twist with fear. The results came back strange. Contamination in his bloodstream. Trace elements that shouldn't be there. The doctor's face darkened with concern. What has he been eating? Has he been exposed to anything unusual? The brother remembered then. Remembered the neighbors whispering. Remembered someone mentioning they'd seen her in odd places. Remembered that his sister-in-law, for all her kindness, had always been a little different. The police came quietly. Not with sirens and drama, but with respectful questions and careful eyes. They searched her home with her permission, expecting to find nothing, hoping to clear her name and move on. But in that cupboard, behind the spices and dried leaves, they found her secrets. The bottles. The pouches. The book with its ancient symbols. And in her refrigerator, wrapped carefully in cloth, evidence that could not be explained away. "Where did this come from?" the officer asked, his voice tight with shock. She stood in her kitchen, surrounded by everything she'd built, everything she'd loved, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, with tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "I was protecting him. There was a curse. I was saving his life." The silence that followed was deafening. The husband, weak and confused, stared at the woman he'd shared a bed with for a decade. What did you do?" "I loved you," she said simply. "I loved you enough to fight the darkness. Even if it meant becoming darkness myself." If you were in his shoes, discovering this truth about someone you loved, would you forgive or demand justice? Comment below. Because this question, this impossible question, is where the story truly begins. The village erupted. Not with violence, but with something worse. Confusion. Fear. The shattering of everything they thought they knew. "She's a monster," some said. "Using human blood. In food. She belongs in prison." But she didn't mean to harm him, others argued. She was trying to save him. Doesn't intention matter? Intention, voices shouted back. She fed him human blood. She violated every law, every moral boundary. In the village square, Elders gathered to debate. In homes across the community, families argued late into the night. What is the line between love and obsession? Between faith and delusion? Between protection and harm? The husband was torn apart from the inside. Part of him recoiled in horror. Part of him remembered 10 years of devotion, of care, of genuine love. She had never struck him. Never belittled him. Never betrayed him in any conventional sense. She had tried to save him. In the most twisted, misguided, devastating way possible, she had tried to save him. They let him visit her in detention. He sat across from her in a bare room, separated by a table but feeling like an ocean stretched between them. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you just tell me you were scared?" She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Would you have believed me? Would you have let me try to save you if you knew how? I didn't need saving that way. You don't understand." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "My grandmother told me stories. About our family. About the curse that follows our bloodline. Every man my grandmother loved died young. My father died at 37. My uncle at 42. You're 38. Don't you see? I watched the signs. The tiredness. The cough. It was starting." He sat back, stunned. "So you believed?" "I believed I was watching you die. And I had the knowledge to stop it. The old ways. The forbidden ways. Yes, they are dark. Yes, they are frightening. But what is more frightening? Doing something terrible to save the person you love, or doing nothing and watching them die?" The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights above. In her eyes, he saw something that terrified him more than her actions. He saw the same desperation he would have felt if roles were reversed. If he'd believed she was dying and he held the power to stop it, even through means that made him monstrous, would he have done the same? The community called for a trial. Not in a formal courthouse, but in the traditional way. Elders. Community leaders. Everyone with a voice gathering to determine what justice meant in a situation with no precedent, no clear answer. Her lawyer, a woman from the city, tried to explain. She was raised in folklore. She believed in these rituals the way others believe in medicine. She didn't intend harm. She intended salvation. "But the blood," someone shouted. "Where did it come from?" The room held its breath. She stood, chains on her wrists, and spoke clearly. "From the morgue. From bodies donated to traditional burial rites. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't harm anyone. I asked the mortician, told him I needed it for rituals, and he believed I was practicing ancestral rites. Which I was. He gave me what was already shared, already lost." Gasps filled the room. It didn't make it better. But it made it different. She wasn't a murderer. She was something more complicated. A woman caught between worlds. Between old beliefs and new laws. Between love and sanity. If this changes how you see her actions, hit that like button. Because right and wrong, in this moment, became something much more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. She would be given psychiatric evaluation. Rehabilitation. Mandatory counseling to separate cultural belief from harmful practice. She would serve time, but not in a prison cell. In a facility where she could be treated, understood, helped to see the line she'd crossed. Some in the community were furious. She got away with it, they muttered. Others felt something like relief. She needed help, not punishment, they said. She needed someone to tell her that love doesn't require blood sacrifice. The husband visited her in the rehabilitation center 6 months later. She looked different. Thinner. Older. The light in her eyes had dimmed, but something else had replaced it. Understanding. Regret. "I'm sorry," she said. The first time she'd said it without defending her actions. "I was so afraid of losing you that I became something you should fear." He sat across from her, studying the face he'd woken up next to for a decade. The doctors say you were right about one thing. I was sick. But not from a curse. From stress. From overwork. From genetics. No more treatable things. She closed her eyes. I know. I know that now. You could have killed me. The contamination in my blood, it could have. I know. A tear slid down her cheek. I was so certain I was saving you that I couldn't see I was destroying us both. He reached across the table. After a long moment, he took her hand. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said quietly. I don't know if we can ever be what we were. But I understand you. I understand that your love for me became a sickness of its own. And I hope you can heal from it. She gripped his hand like a lifeline. Will you wait for me? He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long and honest between them. I don't know, he finally said. Ask me again when you're free. When you've learned to love without fear. When you've found peace with the fact that death is natural and love means letting go when the time comes. She nodded, understanding the gift in his honesty. As he stood to leave, she called out, the curse. He turned back. It was never real, she continued. But there was a threat. Just not the one I thought. The threat was me. The threat was what I was willing to become. That's what I needed to protect you from. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Understanding. Finally understanding. But here's where the story takes its final turn. Its last twist of the knife. 2 years later, after her release, after her therapy, after she'd learned to let go of the old beliefs and embrace the light of reason and truth, she returned to the village. Different. Humbled. Healed. And her husband had moved on. Remarried. Found peace with someone who loved him simply, without darkness, without desperation. She stood at the edge of the village, watching his new life from a distance, and felt something she'd never felt before. Freedom. The burden of keeping him alive had been lifted. The weight of her fear had evaporated. He was happy. He was healthy. He was loved by someone who knew how to love without becoming a monster. And for the first time in years, she smiled. A real smile. Not the performance of the perfect wife. But the genuine smile of someone who had walked through fire and emerged understanding a simple truth. Love is not control. Love is not sacrifice that destroys. Love is not fighting death with darkness. Love is releasing. Love is trusting. Love is accepting that we cannot save everyone, not even those we die for. And sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping back. Letting go. Allowing life to unfold as it will, without our interference, without our desperate interventions. She turned away from the village and walked toward a new life. One built on truth. One free from the weight of old curses and older fears. Behind her, in the kitchen of his new home, her former husband sat down to dinner. His new wife served him a simple meal. Nothing elaborate. Nothing infused with hidden rituals or desperate love. Just food. Made with care. Without shadows. He took a bite, smiled at his wife, and said, "This is perfect." And it was. So here we stand at the end of a story that has no easy answers. Was she a villain? Was she a victim? Was she a woman driven mad by love, or was she always teetering on the edge of darkness, waiting for the right excuse to fall? Perhaps she was all of these things. Perhaps she was none of them. Perhaps she was simply human. Flawed. Afraid. Desperately trying to control a world that cannot be controlled. We tell ourselves we would never do such things. We look at her story and say, I would never cross that line. But would you? If you believed with absolute certainty that someone you loved was dying, and you held in your hands the power to save them, but that power required you to do something unthinkable, would you? Would you become a monster to save an angel? Comment below. Tell me honestly. Would you have done what she did if you truly believed it would save someone you loved? Or would you have let nature take its course, even if it meant losing them? And here's the deeper question, the one that will follow you long after this video ends: where is the line between love and obsession? Between protection and destruction? Between doing everything for someone and destroying them in the process? This story is a mirror. Look into it. What do you see? If this story made you think, if it challenged you, if it left you feeling something you can't quite name, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who loves too hard. Someone who fears loss more than they fear themselves. And remember this, the greatest love is not the love that fights death. The greatest love is the love that accepts life exactly as it is. Fragile. Temporary. Beautiful in its impermanence. The greatest love lets go. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Comment your answer. I'll be reading every single one. Until next time, remember, some stories don't have happy endings. Some stories just have truth. And truth is the only thing that sets us free.